Have you ever stopped to think about the invisible networks that run, well, everything? We're going to dive into the hidden connections that link it all, from the little electrical whispers inside your own body to the massive flow of energy across the entire planet. It's an amazing journey, from a single nerve to the whole of nature.
So let's start with a question like this. Really think about it. The decision to snap your fingers, it just happens. It feels instant, right? That lightning-fast communication is all thanks to our body's own incredibly complex internal electrical grid.
And at the very heart of this grid, you've got the basic building block of every single thought, feeling, and action you've ever had. You have billions of these things, all firing together to create the most sophisticated network known to exist.
And here it is. Meet the neuron. This little guy is both a biological wire and a tiny transmitter, all wrapped up in one microscopic package. These are the cells that keep that constant two-way conversation going between your brain and, well, the rest of you.
So how does one single message actually get sent? Well, it all starts at the dendrite, which kind of acts like an antenna, picking up a signal. This then triggers an electrical impulse that just zips down the axon. Think of it like a spark shooting along a fuse until it hits the very end of the neuron.
But then what? How does the message get to the next neuron in line? It has to make a leap across a tiny, tiny gap called a synapse. At this point, the electrical signal makes the neuron release these special chemicals that jump across that gap and kick off the whole process in the next cell. It's this incredible, non-stop relay race happening millions of times a second inside you right now.
Okay, so you take one of these amazing neurons, and then you connect it with billions of others. What do you get? You get your own personal command center, the nervous system.
Now, this system is basically split into two main parts. You've got the central nervous system, the CNS, that's the boss, the brain and spinal cord making all the big calls. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. Think of this as the messenger network, all the other nerves spreading out through your body, carrying orders from the boss and bringing back intel to the boss.
In this system, it controls literally everything. I'm talking about both the things you have to think about and all the stuff you don't. Voluntary actions, like deciding to walk or talk, those are conscious choices. But then you have all the involuntary actions, like your heart beating or your lungs breathing. That stuff just happens on autopilot, all managed by this amazing internal network.
So our internal network is this perfect system of communication and total dependence. But you know what? That exact same principle applies outside our bodies too. Just like no single neuron can work all by itself, no organism is an island. So now it's time to zoom out, from the network inside us to the massive one all around us. You see, every single living thing is just one small part of a much, much larger system of interaction and dependency, a system that we call an ecosystem.
And inside every ecosystem, all the living things are playing one of three basic roles. First, you have the producers, like plants that make their own energy straight from the sun. Then you have the consumers, who get their energy by, consuming other organisms. And finally, you have the decomposers. They're kind of like the cleanup crew, breaking down all the dead stuff and returning the nutrients back into the system.
The way all these different roles interact with each other, it's really all about one thing, the flow of energy. And the clearest way to see this flow is by looking at something we all learned about in school, a food chain.
Okay, let's start at the very bottom with our producers. Imagine all the plants in a field are holding about 10,000 joules of energy that they got from the sun. That's our starting budget.
Now, a rabbit comes along and eats those plants. But here's the catch. Only about 1,000 of those joules actually get transferred to the rabbit. A whopping 90% of the energy is already gone. The plant used it just to live, or it was lost as heat. It's not a very efficient transfer. And the pattern just keeps going. A fox eats that rabbit, but the energy transfer gets even smaller. It drops all the way down to just 100 joules. With every single step up the food chain, there's a massive energy loss. This is actually a fundamental rule in ecology. It's called the 10% rule. It means that at each level of the food chain, only a tiny fraction of the energy from the level below it actually gets passed on. And that right there, that explains why you have way more grass in a field than you have foxes at the top. There just isn't enough energy to support them. But here's where things get a little strange. And frankly, a little scary. Because while energy goes down as you move up the food chain, something else does the exact opposite, something much more dangerous. And that thing is called biomagnification. This is what happens when nasty, harmful toxins that don't break down get into an ecosystem. See, unlike energy, These toxins don't get used up or lost as heat. They stick around, they build up, they accumulate.
The real danger becomes crystal clear when you just look at the numbers. A toxin might start at a tiny concentration, maybe 2 parts per million in some plankton. Small fish eat tons of that plankton, and the concentration in their bodies climbs to 5 ppm. But then a human, at the top of this particular chain, eats lots of those fish over their lifetime, and the concentration just skyrockets to a shocking 1600 ppm.
And that is the incredibly dangerous paradox we're talking about. Being at the top of the food chain means you are the most vulnerable to this whole process. You get the smallest piece of the energy pie, but you get served the absolute biggest dose of the poison.
So, from the intricate dance of a single neuron firing to the vast interconnected web of life on this planet, it's pretty clear that everything is a system. And what we put into the bottom of that system, whether it's into our environment or our own bodies, it will inevitably find its way to the top. Which leaves us with a final, pretty heavy question. What happens when we simply forget that?